Hello, today we're diving into a topic that might challenge everything you thought you knew about how to teach reading. And I know this because it challenged everything that I had believed for 20 years. I was a fierce balanced literacy advocate, both as a teacher and a teacher educator from 1999 to 2019. However, it was in the year 2019 that I became aware that much of what I thought was true about how to teach reading was actually not backed by research at all. I realized I needed to make some big shifts in how I approached teaching read. Today, I'm sharing the difference between balanced and structured literacy and what shifts you can make to make sure your teaching aligns with research. If you're new here, my name is Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers, creator of the Measure Mom website, and host of the Triple R Teaching podcast. I'm also currently pursuing my PhD in literacy. Let's start by understanding the core differences between balanced and structured literacy. There are many different definitions of balanced literacy. In fact, if you met 100 teachers, they would probably all give you a different definition. But in general, balanced literacy surrounds students with activities that help promote a love of reading. It typically includes read-alouds, shared reading, guided reading, and independent reading. Structured literacy, on the other hand, teaches the structures of language through systematic, explicit, sequential instruction. In other words, we have a plan and we follow it, with, of course, attention to the needs of the students in front of us. Structured literacy focuses on phonology, sound-symbol correspondences, syllables, morphology, syntax, and semantics. And if you're not sure what any of those are, follow along with my YouTube channel. I'll make sure we cover those. As I see it, the fundamental difference between balanced and structured literacy is that balanced literacy is more focused on the activities and structured literacy is more focused on the skills. This does not mean that balanced literacy doesn't have any focus on skills at all, or that structured literacy doesn't use some of the balanced literacy activities, such as read-alouds. But in structured literacy, the activities serve the skills rather than the other way around. So that's how I see the core difference between balanced and structured literacy. Let's go ahead and walk through 7 key differences between the two. Difference number 1. In a balanced literacy classroom, phonemic awareness, if it is taught, tends to be somewhat haphazard. However, within structured literacy, we follow a scope and sequence for teaching phonemic awareness and all of our foundational reading skills. Phonemic awareness, which is this understanding that words are made of individual sounds, is best taught alongside phonics with letters. The best way that I found to do this is through an activity often called sound map. Sound mapping is when you take a word, break it apart into its sounds, and spell each sound. For example, if we're going to map the word ship, as in they rode on a large ship across the ocean, we can start by breaking the word apart into its sounds. Kids can tap the sounds on their desk. They can put the bottom of their hand on their desk and then tap moving in from their pinky. So, sh. 3 sounds or phonemes in the word ship. That means we're also going to have 3 graphemes, not necessarily 3 letters, but 3 spellings that spell those 3 phonemes. So with the word ship, we need 3 blicks. For sh, it, we spell sh with sh, we spell it with I, and we spell p with p. Shit. In that one activity, we practiced phoneme segmenting, where we broke the word apart into its sounds. We practiced phoneme isolation, where we listened to each sound to figure out where it was in the word, and then we spelled it. And then we blended the sounds together. We can even add phoneme manipulation by changing the word. So if we change ship to chip, as in I ate a potato chip, we just have to change the spelling of the first sound. Since sh is changed to sh, we switch out the sh and put in a ch. So that's what I mean by teaching phonemic awareness in a structured way. Let's move on to difference number 2. With balanced literacy, phonics instruction often does not follow a scope and sequence. It's given on an as-needed basis, whereas structured literacy has explicit, systematic, sequential phonics instruction, usually using a comprehensive program. When I think about the elements of a strong phonics lesson, here's what I include. First, I think it's really important to review previously taught concepts. Then you might want to do a phonemic awareness warm-up. So for example, if I'm going to teach a phonics lesson featuring the grapheme SH, I might have my students practice blending and segmenting words that have the sound. And so you could also take a word and break it apart into its sounds. So I might say to my students, let's take the word shed. We put our bikes outside in the shed and break it apart into its sounds. Those activities are getting students ready for what they're going to be learning in the rest of the phonics lesson. After that warm-up, you're going to explicitly teach a new sound-spelling relationship. You'll follow that with blending practice and word chaining or word ladders. You want students to practice reading text that includes that phonics pattern, and you'll conclude with some kind of writing extension, such as dictation or guided writing. This may take more than one day, but those are the things that I see as important for a strong phonics lesson. Difference number 3 is a big one, and that is that in many balanced literacy classrooms, high-frequency words are taught as words to be memorized, whereas within structured literacy, we understand that even those words that we perceive as irregular can be taught by having students pay attention to the individual sounds and spellings in the word. For example, when teaching the word was as a balanced literacy teacher, I probably would have said something like, this is a tricky word, we just have to memorize it. I could hold the word card up and I'd have my students just say the word. This word is was. What's the word? Was. And I would want them to memorize it by its shape. But actually, that's not how the brain learns to read. It's really important that we develop the neural pathways in the brain by teaching phonemic awareness and phonics. And we can do that even with an irregular word like the word was. So what I might do is I might have my students repeat the word after me. Today, you're going to read and spell the word was. Say the word was. Let's break the word apart into its sounds. Ready?
Z.
Okay, so we've already done a little bit of phoneme segmentation. Then we can draw 3 lines because there's 3 sounds, and then we'll look at how to spell each of those sounds. I might know why a word has a peculiar spelling, or I might not, but either way, we're going to look and talk about the spellings for each sound. So when I get to the middle sound, I might say, what might you expect to see in the middle of was? We might expect a U, but in this word, we use A. And for that final spelling, there are lots of words that use S to spell Z, like the word is and has. Here's just another word where we use S to spell the Z sound. After we've written all those graphemes, then we're going to blend the sounds together to read the word was. The fourth key difference between balanced and structured literacy has to do with beginning texts for reading practice. So when I was a balanced literacy teacher, I had my students read these leveled pattern books when they were first learning to read because I thought that that would help them memorize those high-frequency words. I thought that it gave them this really important focus on comprehension because they could get through the book very quickly when they knew the pattern. And I also thought it built fluency. What I didn't understand was that fluency rests on automaticity with letter-sound relationships. And when students are guessing based on the pattern or figuring it out based on the pattern and context, but they couldn't decode the word in isolation, they're actually bypassing a really important mental process called orthographic mapping, and they're not actually reading it at all. Now, if you told me that when I was a balanced literacy teacher, I wouldn't have believed you and I would have gotten pretty upset. But the fact is that students have to be able to read the word all the way through to be actually reading. So instead of having students read these leveled pattern books, at the very beginning, we want them to focus on reading decodable text. A decodable text is simply a text that mostly contains words whose patterns the students had already learned. So we don't introduce a lot of words with patterns that haven't been taught yet. We mostly stick to these patterns that have already been taught so that students can actually practice what they've learned in their phonics lessons. Contrary to what I once believed, decodable text can actually be pretty great. They don't have to be boring or nonsensical. We want to pick the ones that are interesting, that actually tell a story that kids are going to want to come back to. I actually have free decodable text on my website that fit all these criteria. I'll leave a link below this video for you to check them out. I just want to add a caveat here. Decodable texts are like training wheels. They're not forever. I think they have a useful place in phonics lessons for a long time, but when we have kids read on their own or do extra reading practice, we don't have to confine them to decodable text forever. This is really going to depend on the individual child. I'll also leave a link below this video with my blog post explaining when you might want to transition students out of decodable text. Key difference number 5. With balanced literacy, there's more of a focus on meaning than on accuracy. So when I was a balanced literacy teacher, if a child was reading a book and they said house instead of home, I probably wouldn't have sweated it and probably not even corrected them. Because house and home are pretty much the same thing, and meaning was what's most important, right? Well, meaning is important, but it starts with accuracy and word recognition. When we allow substitutions, even meaningful ones, we can reinforce this habit of guessing, or starting a word and flubbing our way through it. This creates problems as texts become more complex and there's less picture support. Key difference number 6 has to do with how students improve in their reading. With balanced literacy, many teachers, myself included, believe that students improve in their reading by reading. So during my reading workshop time, all my students had leveled books at their level, so I thought, in a little bag, and they would just read them over and over. And I thought, lots of reading practice helps you become a better reader. Now, there, of course, is a place for reading practice, and we want a lot of it, but I was leaving out a really important thing before that. Systematic, explicit, sequential instruction in the code so that students become automatic at reading words with particular patterns. It's when they get this automaticity with patterns that we can start to become fluent and then comprehension picks up as well. Simply placing students in pattern books or level books without explicit teaching in the code isn't going to help them achieve automaticity with sound spelling relationships. And the final key difference number 7, is the ultimate goal. Now, I'm not going to lie, when I was a balanced literacy teacher, I had a blog post on my blog all about how to be a good reading teacher. And at the very end, I said, let's not forget the ultimate goal. And what I wrote was, the ultimate goal is that students learn to love reading. I'm going to quote Margaret Goldberg here from her blog, The Right to Read Project. We can't teach love, but we can teach reading. At the end of the day, if my students can't read, I haven't served them. I would love for them to love reading, but that's out of my control. What I can do is teach them how to read and promote the love of reading through the books I read to them and the discussions we have about books. But teaching them to read is key and the most important job we have as reading teachers. If you're feeling any bit defensive about balanced literacy, I understand. I was there too. So I want to quickly address some of the concerns that I had when I made this transition from promoting balanced to structured literacy. I was afraid that structured literacy was boring and kill and drill. But explicit systematic teaching does not have to be boring. We can teach at a quick, interesting pace that keeps everyone engaged. When a knowledgeable, engaging teacher combines the science of reading with the art of teaching, with the science of learning, learning can be joyful. Another concern was that structural literacy was going to ignore comprehension, which I believe was the most important thing. And it's true, comprehension is the goal of reading. With structural literacy approaches in the early grades, we absolutely promote comprehension, but it may not be the same way that you would see in a balanced literacy classroom. We're going to work on it a lot through the read alouds that we do with our students. And then certainly we can focus on comprehension in the decodable texts that our students are reading, but we understand that if they're working laboriously to sound out words, that's going to take a lot of their mental energy, and they may not be ready to fully comprehend the text. But not to worry, we're building a bridge. As they grow in automaticity, they will also grow in fluency, which leads to comprehension. I do want to be clear that while comprehension is the goal, there's no guarantee students will achieve it when they learn to sound out words. That's why we can promote comprehension through explicit teaching of vocabulary, sentence structure, and more. So here's what's clear. Making the shift from balanced to structured literacy is not about throwing away everything that you know. It's about refining your approach to ensure that every student in your classroom becomes a confident, proficient reader. Effective reading instruction isn't about choosing between skills and joy. It's about teaching the right skills in the right sequence with the right support. When we do this, we create confident, proficient readers who have the capacity to enjoy reading because they can actually do it successfully. Want to dive deeper? I've created a free masterclass specifically for K to 3rd grade teachers called The 5 Essential Steps to Reach All Readers. In this workshop, you'll discover the biggest mistakes that teachers make when trying to implement the science of reading and how to avoid them. You'll get key understandings that will transform how you teach reading. You'll learn the truth about sight word memorization and why it's keeping some students stuck. And you'll get my 5-step framework that helps all students reach or exceed grade level benchmarks. You can find the link to that masterclass below, and please like and subscribe.